Have you ever picked up a book that claims to be a history? A record of real people fighting real wars, building real cities, but when you open the front cover, there's something totally missing.
Right, like a map.
Exactly. There's no map. You have all these very specific names, Zarahemla, Nephi, the River Sidon, but you have absolute zero idea where they actually belong on the globe.
It creates a really fascinating disconnect, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Because
oh.
you have a text that reads like history,
Yeah.
and it's full of logistical and geographical details. But for nearly 2 centuries, readers have just been left to guess where to stick the pushpins.
Yeah.
It's kind of like reading The Lord of the Rings without that map of Middle Earth right inside the cover. You're just unmoored.
Completely unmoored. And that is the exact mystery we are tackling today. We are doing a deep dive into the source material called Finding the Nephite World, a Mesoamerican Geography. And I want to set the ground rules right up front for you listening, because I know how this topic can get. This isn't a deep dive into theology.
No, definitely.
We aren't arguing doctrine today.
Right. This is strictly a detective story. We are looking at geography. The mission of this source material is to treat the text of the Book of Mormon like a data set. The goal is to see if it contains enough internal clues to build a consistent map. And then the really big question, does that map actually fit anywhere on the real planet Earth?
And it's a bit of a controversial topic, right? Because I think for a lot of people, the assumption has always been that this story took place over the entire Western Hemisphere. Like North America was the land northward and South America was the land southward.
That is the traditional view, yes, the hemispheric model. But the source we're unpacking today argues that it's just physically impossible based on the text itself. They argue that the setting isn't a continent, it's a neighborhood, a much, much smaller stage.
So let's rewind a bit. Where did that whole continent idea even come from? Was that the original plan?
Well, if we go back to the early days around the 1830s, the historical context suggests that Joseph Smith and the early church members did believe in a hemispheric geography. I mean, it makes sense intuitively if you don't look too closely at the details. You have two big continents connected by a narrow neck, Panama.
Right.
It seems to fit the basic hourglass shape mentioned in the book perfectly.
North America is the top bulb. South America is the bottom bulb. Panama is the neck, and you're done.
Precisely. In fact, our source mentions a note from 1836 by a man named Frederick G. Williams, who was a close associate of Joseph Smith. And he claimed that Lehi, the first prophet in the book, landed in Chile, specifically at 30 degrees south latitude.
Wow, that is incredibly specific. Chile.
It is very specific. And for a while, that was sort of the prevailing thought. But here's where it gets really interesting. The source highlights a major shift that happened in 1842.
What changed in 1842?
Books. Specifically a bestseller called Incidents of Travel in Central America by John Lloyd Stevens. This was basically the Indiana Jones moment of the 19th century.
Oh, I love that.
It was the first time many Americans, including Joseph Smith, were seeing detailed illustrations and descriptions of Maya ruins.
So they see these massive stone cities in the jungle and think, wait a minute, this looks familiar.
Exactly. The Times and Seasons, which was the church newspaper at the time, started publishing editorials just raving about this book. They explicitly suggested that the Nephites lived in the narrow neck of land embracing Central America and Guatemala. They basically shrunk the map from the whole hemisphere down to Mesoamerica almost overnight.
So Joseph Smith himself seemed to be changing his mind based on this new archaeological information.
It appears so. He was learning alongside everyone else. But, and this is a crucial point the source makes, despite all that speculation, the church leadership has never released an official map. From the 19th century to today, they have maintained total neutrality.
Which honestly is great for us because it leaves the door wide open for this kind of investigation. So let's open the book. If we ignore what people thought for 200 years and just look at the text, what does the map actually look like?
The source calls it the internal map. Before you look at a globe, you have to draw what the text describes. And fundamentally, you are right. It is an hourglass. You have a land northward, a land southward, and they are nearly surrounded by water.
Connected by that famous narrow neck of land.
Correct. But here is the aha moment that really destroys the hemispheric theory. It's the scale. The source argues that the entire land southward, which is the main stage for most of the book, is only about 350 miles long.
350 miles, that's it.
That's it.
That's like driving from Los Angeles to San Francisco. That's tiny compared to the continent of South America.
It is minuscule, and the evidence comes down to travel times. The source does this really fun, rigorous analysis of how fast people actually move in the text.
I loved this part. They didn't just guess. They used actual historical pioneer data.
They did. They looked at the journey of Alma's party. This is a group fleeing from a place called the Waters of Mormon to the capital city Zarahemla. They're driving flocks, they have children with them, they're carrying supplies, and the text says it took them 21 days.
Okay, so 21 days. If you're walking across South America, you aren't getting very far in 3 weeks with kids and sheep.
Exactly. The source compares this to Mormon pioneers crossing the plains and even pig drovers in Guatemala.
Wait, pig drovers?
Yes, people herding pigs to market through rough terrain. It sounds funny, but it's actually a great historical proxy for moving large groups of animals and people in that specific climate. They average about 11 miles a day. So if you do the math, 21 days at roughly 11 miles a day, the distance between the two major capitals, Nephi and Zarahemla, is only about 180 to 250 miles.
That completely changes the scope of the story. It turns it from this sprawling continental epic into a very local, high-stakes conflict.
And there's a smoking gun proof for this small geography. It's the story of King Limhi's explorers.
Oh, this is the Lost in the Woods story. The ultimate we refuse to stop and ask for directions moment.
It really is. So King Limhi is trapped in the land of Nephi. That's the southern capital. He sends a group of men to find Zarahemla, the northern capital, to ask for help. But they get lost. They miss Zarahemla entirely.
Which, if Zarahemla is a major city, implies they walked right past it without even seeing it.
They walked past it, went through the narrow neck of land without realizing it, and found the ruins of a destroyed civilization, the Jaredites, in the land northward. They thought those ruins were Zarahemla, so they turned around and went back to Nephi.
Okay, so let's apply the map logic here to the listener. If the land southward was South America and the land northward was North America.
Exactly. To miss Zarahemla in that model, they would have had to walk from, say, Peru, past Colombia, through Panama, all the way to, Ohio, find some ruins, and then walk all the way back to Peru.
Without realizing they had traveled thousands of miles. Without noticing the stars changed or the seasons flipped entirely.
It's impossible. You would know if you crossed a continent. The source argues this mistake is only possible if the distance was remarkably short. They missed the city by maybe 50 miles, walked maybe another 100 miles, found the ruins, and came back. The whole geography has to be compact for that story to make any sense at all.
So we have an hourglass shape. We have a scale that is hundreds of miles, not thousands. Now comes the million-dollar question. Is there anywhere on Earth that actually fits this description?
The source argues there is only one place in the Western Hemisphere that works: Mesoamerica. Specifically, southern Mexico and Guatemala.
And the narrow neck.
The Isthmus of Tehuantepec in southern Mexico.
I'm looking at a map of it right now. It definitely has that saddle shape where the land dips down.
It does. It fits the criteria remarkably well. It's about 120 miles wide. The text describes the neck as being a day-and-a-half's journey for a Nephite. Now, that phrase is debated. Is that a solitary fast runner, a line of defensive forts? But 120 miles is absolutely in the ballpark for a strategic defensive line or messenger relay system.
And what about the rivers? Because the book talks about the River Sidon constantly. It's like the Nile of the Book of Mormon. Everything happens around it: wars, baptisms, commerce.
Right. And the text requires a major river that flows north. That is key. It has to start in the highlands of Nephi in the south and flow down to Zarahemla and empty into an East Sea.
Which is unusual, right? Because most rivers in that part of the world don't flow north.
It is very specific. And the Grijalva River in Chiapas, Mexico, matches this perfectly. It flows through a central basin, the central depression of Chiapas, which matches the land of Zarahemla. It flows north and it empties into the Gulf of Mexico, which in this configuration would be the East Sea.
Okay, but hold on. I'm looking at the map of Mexico again. If I look at the Isthmus of Tehuantepec and the Grijalva River, they run kind of crooked.
You noticed?
Yeah, the isthmus runs west to east or maybe northwest. But the Book of Mormon talks about north and south. If I'm a Nephite looking north toward the narrow neck on a modern map, I'm actually looking west. Does that break the theory?
This is probably the biggest hurdle for modern readers. But the source provides a really compelling cultural explanation. We are obsessed with magnetic north. We think of north as a fixed mathematical point on a compass. Ancient cultures were not.
So how did they decide which way was up?
Often it was based on the sun or the sea. In a Hebrew context, directions were based on orientation. You face the east, the rising sun. That means the west is behind you, or the sea.
Okay, makes sense.
But look at the Maya context, which is where we were placing this. For the Maya, south meant right hand, and north meant left hand. Directions were often determined by the local topography, the lay of the land, and the relationship to the coastlines.
So if the coastline runs diagonally, north runs diagonally.
Exactly. The source quotes Thomas Gage, a 17th century traveler in this exact region. He wrote about traveling southward from Mexico to Guatemala, but if you look at a compass, he was traveling east. He wasn't stupid. He just defined south as the direction the land flows away from Mexico City.
So the Nephite north is skewed.
Yes, likely by about 45 degrees from our magnetic north. They were following the river valleys and the mountain ranges. If the Grijalva River flows down to the sea, that direction is north to them, even if our compass says northwest. Once you rotate your mental map, that 45 degrees, everything in the text snaps into place with the Mexican geography.
That is wild. It's like you have to put on ancient glasses to see the map correctly.
Precisely. It's about seeing the world how they saw it, not how a modern satellite sees it.
Okay, let's zoom in on some specific features. The book mentions a narrow pass. Is that the same as the narrow neck?
No, and the distinction matters a lot. The neck is the whole isthmus, that 120-mile wide bridge. The narrow pass is described as a specific military choke point.
Like a gate.
Right. The force identifies this as a specific ridge of sandstone and gravel near the Caucalcos River.
Why that specific ridge?
Because of the mud. This is the tropics.
Yeah.
During the rainy season, the lowlands on either side of this ridge flood completely. They basically become impassable swamps, or what the text calls seas on the west and east. This ridge becomes the only dry ground to get from the south to the north.
So if you are a Nephite general, you park your army on that ridge and you control the whole continent.
Exactly. It matches the tactical descriptions in the book perfectly. It turns a generic narrow pass into a specific geographical necessity dictated by the weather.
Now we have to address the elephant in the room, or maybe the tapir in the room,
Go ahead.
the hill Cumorah.
Yes.
The Book of Mormon says the final battles, the total destruction of the Nephites, happened at the hill Cumorah. But Joseph Smith found the golden plates in a hill called Cumorah in upstate New York.
Correct.
So if the map is in Mexico, why are the plates in New York? Did Joseph get it wrong, or is the map wrong?
This is known as the two Cumorahs theory. The source argues that the events, the war, the cities, the civilization happened in Mesoamerica. The hill where they died was likely in the Tuxtla Mountains of southern Mexico.
Okay, so Cumorah number 1 is in Mexico.
Right. But recall that Moroni, the last survivor, wanders for 36 years after the final battle before he buries the plates.
36 years is a long time. You can walk a long way in 36 years.
It is a lifetime. The source argues that Moroni carried the records from the battlefield in Mexico to the deposit spot in New York over the course of those decades.
Walking from Mexico to New York, carrying gold plates, that seems a bit ambitious.
It sounds impossible until you look at historical precedents. The source brings up David Ingram. Have you heard of him?
No.
He was a shipwrecked English sailor in the 1500s. He walked from Tampico, Mexico, all the way to Canada.
No way.
He did, and here's the kicker. He did it in 11 months.
Wait, 11 months?
Yeah.
And Moroni had 36 years.
Exactly. So geographically, it is entirely plausible for a single traveler to move that distance. The argument is that the Cumorah in New York is simply the repository, likely named after the battlefield, in memory of his fallen people, not the site of the war itself.
That's a really poignant image, actually. The lone survivor carrying the history of his people across a continent.
It connects the two locations without breaking the internal geography of the text. It solves the puzzle of how you can have a Mesoamerican setting, but a New York discovery.
There is one last counter-argument the source tackles, and that's the changed face of the land. The Book of Mormon describes massive destruction at the time of the crucifixion, earthquakes, mountains becoming valleys. Some people argue, well, you can't map it because the geography was erased.
Right, the global blender theory. But the source says, look closer at the text.
What does the text say?
It shows continuity. Yes, there was destruction, but Zarahemla was rebuilt on its old site. The narrow pass was still used by armies after the destruction, exactly the same way it was used before.
So the landscape was scarred but not scrambled.
Exactly. Mormon, who is writing hundreds of years later, describes the topography in a way that is consistent with the early accounts. If the map had been totally wiped, he wouldn't be able to do that. So the source argues that we could still look for these places today.
So putting this all together, we have a limited geography in southern Mexico, a skewed north, a travel scale that matches pioneers and pigs.
And a timeline of travel that fits the distance perfectly.
It really paints a different picture. I mean, usually when people think of the Book of Mormon, they think of these vague mythical lands, and they went into the wilderness, but this makes it feel distinct.
That is the power of this kind of analysis. When you start treating the geography as real rather than vague or mythical, the reading experience changes. You aren't just reading about armies meeting in the borders. You are visualizing them maneuvering through specific river valleys in Chiapas. You see them fighting for control of a specific ridge because the swamps are flooding on either side.
It turns it from a collection of stories into a history of a specific people in a specific place.
It grounds the textual claims in physical reality. Whether you believe the book is ancient history or not, the internal consistency of the geography is startling when you overlay it on Mesoamerica. It fits in ways that random guessing usually doesn't.
It certainly makes you want to pull up Google Earth and start looking at the Isthmus of Tehuantepec with fresh eyes. And it brings up a thought for you listening to take away from all this. We talked about how the church, never releasing an official map, left the door open for this research. But think about how brilliant that neutrality actually is.
What do you mean?
Well, if they had officially endorsed that hemispheric map back in the 1800s, based on the limited science of the time, the text would be locked into a model that we now know is geographically impossible. By staying neutral, they inadvertently allow the text to speak for itself centuries later, once we actually understood things like the Mayan directional systems or the travel speeds of pig drovers. It makes you wonder how many other ancient texts we might be completely misunderstanding simply because we're forcing our modern worldview onto their ancient maps.
That is a phenomenal point. It's a reminder to let the past speak its own language. I highly recommend looking at a map of southern Mexico today. Look for the hourglass. It's right there, hiding in plain sight.
That's a wrap on our deep dive into the Nephite world. We'll leave you with that image, a lone survivor hiking north, leaving the hourglass behind. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.